Viewer discretion is advised.
I certainly don't incite violence.
Knock the crap out of him. I'd like to punch him in the face.
America manufactures terrorism.
We came, we saw, he died.
That terrorism is spread across the world.
Dropping bombs on innocent people. Has been over 200 children so far. These are war crimes. I think we have to be very honest. Let us not be deceived.
U.S. forces at the ready. President Obama authorizing targeted airstrikes.
Nazi scientists, some of them tied to war crimes, including horrific concentration camp experiments, brought to the U.S. in a secret program to advance American security interests during the Cold War.
War makes money for the rich control the narrative. The war on terrorism is a business, and that business creates global genocide. There is a global agenda to exterminate Palestine. They want you to believe their narrative, but there isn't enough evidence to support their claims.
Just less than 24 hours after the Israeli army raided the hospital, on November 15th, they released a statement saying that they didn't have an indication there were captives being held there.
This is political true crime.
The region was among the earliest in the world to see human habitation, agricultural communities, and civilization. In the Bronze Age, the Canaanites established independent city-states that were influenced by the surrounding civilizations, among them Egypt, which ruled the area in the late Bronze Age. During the Iron Age, two related Israelite kingdoms, Israel and Judah, controlled much of Palestine, while the Philistines occupied its southern coast. Over time, Palestine had seen many conflicts and several different groups in the region. After World War II, survivors of the Holocaust settled into their new lives. Displaced by war and genocide, they would spread out all over the world. One such place was Palestine, and this is where our story begins.
And they collected all the men, and they shot them. They have a machine gun, and they killed them, all of them.
And they killed everyone. They opened fire for all people.
Most of Khan Yunis men killed in that day. More than 700 people killed in that day. All of the children there became orphans. In 1948, the Jewish settlers start bombing Jaffa from everywhere, and the people of Jaffa haven't any weapon to defend themselves.
I remember that the Israeli forces, they came to us and they bombarded us by planes and by tanks, by the Israeli forces.
The people of Jaffa, they run from place to place under this pressure. They start to push us by force. In the beginning, they use the guns and they use tanks. But when we reach around the port, they start to bomb us from plane.
They started to escape to the beach of Jaffa, to escape by the sea to Gaza Strip and to Lebanon. And there is really Greek ships waiting to help them to escape to Gaza and Lebanon.
They separated the two groups, right and left. The people on the right, they later, under the force, they moved in direction of West Bank, and some people of them stay in Qilia.
When the Israelis occupied our city, our village, Kufr Ana, my dad was outside the village. He was with the fighters, with the resistance men of Palestine. My mother, with small children, they left the city, the village.
When the Israelis go into Deir Yassin and Kufr Qasim and kill all the people, and we get scared, they start to drop a Bible. They ask us to leave from here, from the village. And of course the people get scared and left the village and go, and they ask they leave for 1 week. After that, you come back. And we didn't come back anyhow. We were going to Jordan.
When we come back from the beach to our home, my father asked me to ask about what happened to our neighbors. And first home, Saadoni family, they killed 3 brothers. And one of them, he held his child and he said to Israeli soldiers, please don't kill me for the sake of this child. He said, you and your child. His child leg cut from the end and he died. And when I go to their home, I saw their bodies still in the home. They go to the other homes. Most of Khan Yunis men killed in that day. More than 700 people killed in that day. All of the children there became orphans. It's big massacre. They killed the men of Khan Yunis city and they collected them in groups, every group between 30 and 40 person, and they are ordered them to look to the wall and they shoot all of them.
There is auntie of my father. She live in the area of Jaffa, but I don't remember exactly the town. The Jews came to the town and they killed everyone. They opened fire for all people. All people there pass away except 2. Her brother, old one, and her son.
Before I left Palestine, the Israeli scare us. They make Deir Yassin. They kill most of the people there. In Kufr Qasim, they kill all the people. The another village, they get scared. Every father, he want to take his kids and go out till the war is finished.
They came in the morning and they killed all the men. They collected all the men in the area, and there is a big area in Alma, and they collected all the men in there, and they killed all the people, all the men there. They shot them. They have a machine gun, and they killed them, all of them, in front of everybody. Yes, sir. I was witnessing that. I was witnessing there. Yes.
My friend Abdullah Hamouda, he was 12 years old at that time. He was in a group. His teacher, Mr. Alam Al-Alami, beside him, he said to him when they ordered them to look to the wall, he said to his teacher, they will kill us. He said, don't be scared, come in front of me. And he put him in front of him and they start shooting him. About 35 persons killed. Still, Muhammad still alive. When the killers moving in their car, he tried to get up, his leg is broken, he can't get up, and he's still moving on his back until he reaches their home, and their neighbor fixed his leg until he go to the hospital, and he came to the school with 6, and that still in my mind from that time. I can't forget. I'm still suffering until now from what happened to our people in Khan Yunis city.
Jaffa people, we have our registered of our biyarat or our lands over there. Up to now, I have it. It is kept in one bank here. I kept all the document given from my father to me, which is our wealth in Jaffa. They stolen the land, they stolen the things, yeah, but the document with us, inshallah, in the future, when we back to our country, we can use it.
We have a house in Jaffa, house and land in Jaffa, not far from the water. It's called Hay Nuzha. When I went the last 2 times there, our land was not occupied by anybody, and there was a blue strap, white blue strap surrounding it like a fence. It wasn't a fence, just a strap. They can demolish it, but I don't know why they left it, and other houses as well for other people. They're all strapped with a blue strip, and they just kept empty.
After 1 year, they came to the camp and they informed the manager of the camp to call my father. And they came and sat with him from 8 morning up to 2 afternoon. They asked him about many things. Then my dad, in a very smart manner, simple way, he said, yes, you are talking that I am sick, I am old, and you want to give me the money for my land to have fun. What I will do in that money, I might die tomorrow, after a month, a year. Allah knows, God knows. So why I will sell my land and take that money and throw it? I don't want to sell my land. I will keep it for my children such that they can utilize it. He was thinking that we will return back to our homeland in Jaffa, Kufr Ana, shortly. He was expecting something, liberation will happen, but he died in 1971.
Well, I was all my life dreaming to go back to Palestine. Till this time. Before 5 years, I take my kids. I have 3 sons. I go with them together to Palestine to show him our land, our house in Palestine. And the Israeli, they all farmman, they take our land and they work there. When they see the car, the man is come, he stopped, he said, what you looking for? I said, well, I born in here in Hamidiyah. And where is Hamidiyah? They changed about 70 years. His father came to Palestine and he born in here. And they kicked me from my house and my land and yeah.
So when I remember that, I really shocked. I really become very upset. My land is with others who came from around the world and not allow us to go back. And that's how the Israelis create their, what they say, country. But inshallah, we will go back one day.
January 21st, 1946, Einstein wrote the following letter to Mr. Henry J. Factor. Dear Sir, I have served as witness before the Anglo-American Inquiry Commission on Palestine for the sole purpose to act in favor of our just cause. But it is, of course, impossible to prevent distortion by the press. I am in favor of Palestine being developed as a Jewish homeland, but not as a separate state. It seems to me a matter for simple common sense that we cannot ask to be given the political rule over Palestine, where 2/3 of the population are not Jewish. What we can and should ask is a secured binational status in Palestine with free immigration. If we ask more, we are damaging our own cause, and it is difficult for me to grasp that our Zionists are taking such an intransigent position which can only impair our cause. Very truly yours, Albert Einstein.
Well, 1967 established the newly formed state as a first-class military power backed by powerful Western countries. Israel almost tripled its territory. On the 5th of June 1967, Israel launched an attack against Egypt, Syria and Jordan after Egyptian President Nasser declared his intention to strike Israel. Well, after 6 days of fighting, Israel had seized control of Jordan's West Bank, Syria's Golan Heights, and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Well, the Sinai was later returned to Egypt, while the West Bank, home to 2.4 million Palestinians, as well as the fertile Golan Heights, they both remain under occupation.
It was a sunny summer day on June 8, 1967. The US wasn't having a good year. Racial discrimination and poverty had sparked riots all over the country. The Vietnam War was raging and 10,000 US soldiers died that year alone. It was also the height of the Cold War, and US President Lyndon Johnson found himself close to a conflict in the Middle East. Israel had surprised the world and its Arab neighbors when it attacked Egypt on June 5, 1967, starting what became a massive land grab. To give you some context here, Arab powers like Egypt and Syria were backed by the Soviet Union, while Israel was backed by the US and allied powers. Back to that sunny day on June 8th, the USS Liberty, a state-of-the-art US intelligence gathering vessel, was sailing across Mediterranean waters and into the war zone. The spy ship was in international waters, off the Egyptian coast in Sinai. Exclusive interviews obtained by Al Jazeera revealed the shocking details of the entire incident.
Our primary purpose was to intercept communications of the Russian spy aircraft as it were at Alexandria, Egypt, and that was our job, was to find them. We were not targeted against the Israelis.
At this point, the 1967 war had just 2 days left. Sinai, East Jerusalem, and Gaza had been seized, Jordan and Egypt had been defeated, and only Syria was holding out. The USS Liberty survivors all claimed that they couldn't hear anything from the Egyptian side.
The airwaves were dead. The only voices we did get were those of Israeli or Hebrew, was what we were hearing.
Israel owned the land and skies, and the Americans had been identified by their allies.
I was listening to the chatter the night before. They knew it was an American ship that came into the area. They knew who we were.
All morning on June 8th, an Israeli reconnaissance aircraft flew over the Liberty, knowing that it was an American vessel.
They were slowly lumbering over our ship, and we were waving at them, they were waving at us. And I felt that we were in great shape because they knew who we were.
They're our friends. We felt safe. Actually, it was a secure feeling to see them.
The Liberty was actually the only sizable vessel in the area that day. The ship even boasted a massive American flag that could be seen from miles away. The last thing that anyone expected was an attack.
Sun was shining, blue sky, clouds, nice, people sunbathing on the deck. We had lunch, and 5 minutes later maybe, here came the jets, and nobody really knew what was happening until they started firing.
Israeli military jets started opening fire at the Liberty. Surviving crew members recount how the Israelis fired rockets at the ship and jammed the signals so the crew couldn't request help, and then proceeded to drop napalm on the unarmed crew. And to top it all off, the Israeli Navy machine gunned life rafts that the US Marines were using to escape death and get the injured away to safety. They then proceeded to torpedo the vessel in hopes of sinking it. The dog had bitten off the hand that feeds him. And so you might be wondering now what the US did about all of this. Surely they held the Israeli government to account, retaliated in some way, diplomatically, politically, economically, something. Well, no. The US did pretty much nothing to honor its victims, and the whole thing was covered up, which is probably the reason why you've never heard about the incident in the first place.
Israeli government wants Gaza's multi-billion-dollar gas field. Officials discovered oil reserves in Gaza in the year 2000. 60% of those reserves belong to Palestinians, but Israel doesn't want to share.
This corporate video touts the exciting prospects for Israel as an oil producer. By no means in amounts approaching its Arab neighbors, but still a promising economic asset for a country that's always been a big energy importer. The company licensed to drill in this area plans up to 14 wells, one of them already pumping commercial quantities of oil. What the company doesn't stress is plain to see. Its Megid oil field lies within shouting distance of the Israeli separation barrier. Though the Israeli government won't talk about it, by many estimates, only 20% of the oil field is inside Israel, the rest extending into the occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, the Palestinian gas company has signed a 20-year contract to supply its power station with natural gas from Israel's offshore Leviathan field. That would make Palestinians the gas field's first foreign customer. But the Palestinian Authority says that doesn't mean it's giving up on developing its own projects in areas it controls. For the foreseeable future, then, the Palestinians will have to keep relying on Israel for most of their energy needs.
Israel has committed a number of war crimes over the years, bombing schools, bombing hospitals, creating displacement all over the Middle East.
Israel has waged a genocide on the Palestinians, and they will stop at nothing to conquer Palestine.
What we're watching is a campaign of unmitigated genocide, 160 children a day. It is time for all of us to rise up on behalf of the Palestinian people. To not rise up is to be complicit.
Many Palestinians fear they'll never be allowed to return home. Some have accused the Biden administration of facilitating the ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Albert Einstein knew what would happen in Palestine. He wrote, "When a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it the terrorist organizations built up from our own ranks. I am not willing to see anybody associated with those misled and criminal people."
On February 19th, 2018, The Intercept reports how Israel went from helping create Hamas to bombing it.
How Israel helped create Hamas.
Hamas, which is the acronym for an Arabic phrase meaning Islamic Resistance Movement, was founded in 1987, at the start of the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, against the Israeli occupation. But its roots were planted much earlier. The Hamas founder Sheikh Ahmed Yassin was a half-blind, disabled Palestinian cleric and member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood had been repressed by the Egyptians in Gaza prior to 1967, but once the Israelis invaded and occupied the Strip, they didn't just turn a blind eye to these Islamists, they encouraged them. See, the Israelis, especially right-wing Israelis, wanted to undermine the power of the dominant Palestinian political force at that time, the nationalist PLO, at the heart of which was the secular Fatah party of Yasser Arafat, their bête noire.
Hamas
was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat.
Arafat himself told an Italian newspaper, quote, "Hamas is a creature of Israel." He even claimed that former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin admitted as much to him, calling it a fatal error. Now, you might be wondering, why should I believe mad Ron Paul or the famously shady Yasser Arafat? Well, you don't have to. You can believe top Israeli and US officials who've basically owned up to all this. Brigadier Yitzhak Segev, for example, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza, and later told a New York Times reporter that he helped finance the Islamic movement. "The Israeli government gave me a budget," he said, "and the military government gives to the mosques." Colonel David Hakam, who worked in Gaza in the late 1980s as an Arab affairs expert in the Israeli military, has admitted that the original sin was Israeli support for Yassin in the late 70s. But at the time, he has argued, nobody thought about the possible results. Well, Avner Cohen did. Cohen was the Israeli official who was responsible for religious affairs in Gaza for more than 2 decades, and who now says, quote, "Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation." Yeah, Cohen's words. He actually wrote an official report to his superiors in the mid-1980s, warning them not to play divide and rule in the occupied territories and calling on Israel to, quote, "break up this monster before this reality jumps in our face." But no one else on the Israeli side really took the possibility of blowback seriously at that time. They never do they? Hamas has since killed far more Israeli civilians than any secular Palestinian militant group, and its leaders have been pretty viciously anti-Israeli and even anti-Semitic in their rhetoric.
لن نعترف بإسرائيل. لا مكان لكم بيننا ولا مستقبل لكم بين الأمم. إنكم إلى زوال.
Sheikh Yassin would eventually be assassinated by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza.
Sheikh Yassin and its organization, the Hamas, are responsible to the killings of more than 400 Israelis. So the question shouldn't be why now. I think it should be why not before.
Why not before? Well, because before, Israel was actually nudging and winking at Yassin and co., building them up as a rival to Arafat's Fatah. The die was cast for blowback. Blowback, incidentally, that they decided to double down on when they assassinated Yassin.
You can hear the crowds chanting for Hamas, and any idea that this operation would actually suppress or diminish that organization seems to be ill-judged.
The inconvenient truth is that Hamas is in part a creature of Israel's own making, an enemy that Israel spent more than 20 years helping to build up, and then spent the next 20 years, the past 20 years that is, trying to bomb, besiege, and blockade out of existence. The 3 Gaza wars fought by Israel against Hamas since 2008 killed around 2,000 Palestinian civilians and a dozen Israeli civilians.
Hamas leader Khalid Mashal is a table tennis enthusiast. The billionaire lives a life of luxury in Qatar, also in Turkey, according to reports. Mashal is one of the 11 billion squad whose lifestyle has been much different from that of the people Hamas rules. The Six-Day War in 1967 forced Mashal's family to flee the West Bank, and he has since lived in other parts of the Arab world in exile. For that reason, he was considered part of Hamas's external leadership. 1967 Six-Day War, during which Israel occupied the West Bank, his family fled to Jordan, and after a month or 2, they joined Abu al-Qidar in Kuwait, where Mashal completed high school. He entered the prestigious Abdullah al-Salim Secondary School in the early 1970s and joined the Muslim Brotherhood in 1971. 19-year-old Mashal visited historical Palestine in 1975 for 2 months for the first time since the occupation began in 1967. He was able to travel extensively both in Israel and the occupied territories. The trip deepened his feelings for his homeland and his sense of the losses in 1948 and 1967. After graduating, Mashal became a teacher and taught physics in Kuwait until 1984. Internal closed conference in an Arab state, which included delegates from the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian refugees from Arab states. The conference laid the foundation stone for the creation of Hamas. Mashal was part of the project's leadership. After 1984, he devoted himself to the project on a full-time basis. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990, he and the rest of Hamas leadership in Kuwait relocated to Jordan.
Israel has even committed war crimes against its own people.
Israel killed its own people. Israel admits Apache helicopters fired on their own civilians running from the Supernova Music Festival. Tuval Iskapa, the security coordinator at Kibbutz Be'eri, said Israeli commanders made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages. Israel's military released footage showing hundreds of scorched cars moved from the Nova Music Festival, which it claims that Hamas attacked. The cars have been targeted with highly destructive weapons that Hamas does not own. An IDF soldier admits it was the Israeli who killed and raped their women, not Hamas.
מי שחט, מי אנס, מי רצח, מי ערף ראשים, זה האזרחים, זה לא חמאס, זה האזרחים. זה מה שלא מבינים, שזה האזרחים. החמאס בא, פתח, הוריד חיילים והתקדם קדימה. מי שבא ואנס וביזז ועשה את כל הזוועות, האכזריות הזאת, זה האזרחים. ראיתי במו עיניי.
This all falls under the Hannibal Directive. So what is it? The Hannibal Directive is a top-secret Israeli order of the General Staff which was first devised in 1986. Its purpose was to prevent the enemy from escaping with a soldier, even if it meant endangering that soldier or any civilians. It was last executed in 2014, known in Israel as Operation Protective Edge, which killed 72 Israelis and over 2,000 Palestinians. We see it being implemented now. Israel doesn't like having hostages. So, let's wrap this up. First, the IDF used aircraft and tanks to bomb Israeli houses that contained hostages instead of negotiating professionally, which caused the massacre. Israel was so humiliated on October 7th that they panicked and slaughtered their own people. The IDF propaganda machine then generated fake news to spread through their proxies like Ben Shapiro to generate sympathy for Israel, not to mention terrible acting.
Incoming.
These lies are still repeated today with no remorse. The photos of burned bodies came from Hellfire drones or JDAMs. This is who you support, who you fund, who you cheer for. Those who would kill you in a heartbeat. For more videos follow Al Haqiqa.
Israel cannot hide their atrocities, even against their own.
There is growing evidence that in the chaotic fighting that took place once Hamas militants entered Israel on October 7th, the Israeli military decided to target not only Hamas fighters, but the Israeli captives with them. Tuval Iskapa, a member of the security team for Kibbutz Be'eri, told the Israeli press he set up a hotline to coordinate between kibbutz residents and the Israeli army. Iskapa told the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that as desperation began to set in, quote, the commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants in order to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages. The newspaper reported that Israeli commanders were, quote, compelled to request an aerial strike against its own facility inside the Erez crossing to Gaza in order to repulse the terrorists who had seized control. That base housed Israeli civil administration officers and soldiers. Israel in 1986 instituted a military policy called the Hannibal Directive, apparently named for the Carthaginian general who poisoned himself rather than be captured by the Romans, following the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers by Hezbollah. The directive is designed to prevent Israeli troops from falling into enemy hands through the maximum use of force, even at the cost of killing the captured soldiers and civilians. The directive was executed during the 2014 Israeli assault on Gaza, known as Operation Protective Edge. Hamas fighters on August 1, 2014 captured an Israeli soldier, Lieutenant Hadar Golden. In response, Israel dropped more than 2,000 bombs, missiles, and shells on the area where he was being held. Golden was killed, along with over 100 Palestinian civilians.
This is what we know about the October 7th event.
CCTV footage from a convenience store in a gas station that is in the Magen Junction that's very close to Nir Oz and Kisufim. You can see the two employees there in the gas station seeing what's happening outside, hearing the gunshots, realizing that there are dozens of these terrorists that are approaching them. They had to quickly decide what to do, rushed to the back of that store, eventually locked themselves up in a refrigerated room as these terrorists continued to make their way into that gas station.
The soldiers are seen entering the gas station. They are heavily armed. Once inside, they begin to search the store. One of the soldiers would signal to another and enter the building. They make their way through the store and into the back.
You can see them taking over that store, shooting at whatever they can. They're searching for the staff. Miraculously, they were not able to find those two Israelis that were hiding in that refrigerator.
Once they searched the building, they began taking food from the store. The men were organized and seemed to be after only one thing: food.
The two gas station employees who were saved, it was a Jewish employee and an Israeli Arab.
The men are captured on CCTV taking anything they can carry. They only took food. One of the men was captured eating something he took from the store. Another is seen taking a supply of bottled drinks. Once the men were done, they fled the scene. No one was hurt and no one was injured.
Let's talk about what's happening in Israel and Gaza. A massive surprise attack on Israel by Hamas, the group that controls Gaza, has quickly escalated into the most intense conflict in decades.
An unprecedented military operation by Hamas and a colossal failure of Israeli intelligence.
You had all these gunmen entering up to 22 different locations outside the Gaza Strip.
Israel says hundreds of its citizens have been killed and many more injured.
The violent Israeli raids have not stopped bombarding across the Gaza Strip.
There's so much going on, so we're going to answer 3 questions to help you understand what's happening. This is Gaza. It's a small strip of Palestinian land that's been under a land, sea, and air blockade by Israel since 2007. More than 2 million Palestinians live there, crammed in, and they can only leave with Israeli permission, which few people get. It's often referred to as the world's largest open-air prison. And Hamas is the political and armed group that runs Gaza. It took control there after it won an election in 2006, but there hasn't been a vote since then. Hamas is part of a regional alliance that also includes Iran and the armed group Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel, the US, EU, and others have designated Hamas a terrorist organization. Many Palestinians see Hamas as the most active group when it comes to resistance against Israeli occupation, especially since the other main Palestinian political group, Fatah, which controls parts of the West Bank, is often criticized for being ineffective. Now, Israel and Hamas have fought on and off wars. The last big one was in 2021. In the past, it's usually been an exchange of fire across the Gaza border. Hamas fires rockets into Israel. Israel drops bombs on Gaza, usually with a huge civilian death toll. But what happened this time around was very different. A lot of people are calling it unprecedented. Why? Well, really because of the scale of the attack that Hamas launched and because nobody really saw it coming. It started early on October 7th. Hamas fired thousands of rockets into Israel and then sent hundreds of fighters over the border. They overran a border crossing and broke down the security barrier that surrounds Gaza with bulldozers. Some fighters were in vehicles, some even flew over on motorized paragliders. They attacked towns and villages. At least 900 Israelis were killed, including around 260 at a music festival. Videos online showed panicked people trying to escape. Hamas also says it's captured more than 100 Israelis, including some senior military officers. Israel says children and elderly women were also taken. Nothing like that has happened since Hamas captured one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, in 2006 and held him in Gaza for 5 years. 3 days after Hamas launched its attack, there were still gun battles going on between Hamas fighters and Israeli forces in 3 main areas in southern Israel. Which brings us to another reason why this is also unprecedented, and that's Israel's failure to stop it. Remember, the Israeli army is one of the world's most sophisticated military and intelligence organizations, and the border with Gaza is heavily monitored. So this attack came as a huge shock.
Unfortunately, we were taken by surprise, absolute surprise.
Any kind of communication going in and out of Gaza, at least in theory, would be listened to by Israel's intelligence units. And of course, the border, so-called, around Gaza, a wall and fence, is also highly militarized, but clearly, that collapsed.
I think it raises questions as to Israel's military capability, which isn't a good look for Israel, since it likes to be seen as the strong man and incredibly capable in that region.
Israel has also vowed an unprecedented response and says it plans to wipe out Hamas's military capability and end its control of Gaza.
האויב ישלם מחיר שהוא לא ידע כמותו.
Israel's been hitting Gaza hard with airstrikes and artillery.
All right, Yumna, please take cover.
No, it's okay. This is a missile attack on Palestine Tower.
There have been pictures coming out showing devastation and bodies being pulled out from the rubble. More than 700 people have been killed, including children.
Yes. This is just an airstrike now that you've heard. It seems that it's very close here from the area of where we are. We're at El Yarmouk neighborhood. This is the 4th mosque to be bombarded in the Gaza Strip.
Remember, Gaza is really densely populated. Civilians there are trapped with nowhere to escape to. There was already a blockade there. But now Israel has imposed a total siege on Gaza, which amounts to collective punishment, making it illegal under international law.
אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
Israel has called up 300,000 army reservists, and it looks like a ground invasion of Gaza is also imminent.
In front of me, I can see soldiers coming in on Humvees, Jeeps, Range Rovers. We are seeing an increasing troop build-up.
Okay, so why has all this happened now? Well, there's a clue in the name Hamas gave for its attack, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Just days before, hundreds of Israeli settlers, with the protection of Israeli forces, stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. This is a hugely important and contested religious site. It's often a flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've done another Star Here episode all about that. We'll put a link to it in the comments. Now, Hamas said it launched its attack in response to the desecration of Al-Aqsa.
فقد قررنا أن نضع حداً لكل ذلك بعون الله ليفهم العدو أنه قد انتهى الوقت الذي يعربد فيه دون محاسب.
But even if recent events at Al-Aqsa played a role, Hamas's huge attack would have taken a lot of planning. They also say the attack was a response to decades of Israeli violence and occupation. The daily impact of that occupation on the lives of Palestinians inside Gaza and in other occupied territories like the West Bank is also a big part of the story.
Analysts and experts have been warning for months that the reality on the ground, the record number of Palestinians killed, dispossessed, and injured and traumatized by Israeli forces and settlers across the occupied West Bank, the continued siege on Gaza, the relentless attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque, they were all pushing the situation towards this moment. I don't think anybody imagined the particulars of the moment.
A report by the Euramed Human Rights Monitor expressed concern over allegations that the Israeli army confiscated dozens of dead bodies from Al-Shifa and the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, as well as from the safe corridor Israel had implemented and subsequently targeted. The report suggests that the Israeli army took Palestinian bodies from a mass grave in one of Al-Shifa's courtyards, a claim backed by the Director General of the Health Ministry in Gaza, Munir Al-Bursh.
واختطف الاحتلال 130 شهيد من ساحة المستشفى وأخذهم إلى جهات مجهولة. الاحتلال عاجلنا وفاجأنا ودخل مستشفى الشفاء وأخذ هذه الجثث الملقاة في ساحة الشفاء والموجودة في الثلاجة باللون الأزرق.
Euromed Monitor says suspicions of organ theft were based on evidence cited by medical professionals in Al-Shifa. This included claims of missing cochleas and corneas, as well as other vital organs like livers, kidneys, and hearts. But the doctors also said that the claims cannot be proven or disproven solely by forensic medical examination, as many of the patients underwent surgery before their death. Allegations that the Israeli army stole corpses during its siege of the medical complex have been reported by several other outlets. However, this is not the first time Israel has been accused of organ theft.
يعني هي موجودة هذه السرقة بدليل أن هناك تحدثنا عن الشهيد بلال غانم وخضر طرزي وهناك عدد يعني من هؤلاء الشهداء الذين تم سرقة أعضائهم.
In 2009, an article by Swedish newspaper Aftonbladet suggested that the Israeli army kidnapped and killed young Palestinians and may have harvested their organs in the 1990s. The allegations sparked a diplomatic row between Israel and Sweden, with Tel Aviv denying the reports of organ harvesting and called the claims anti-Semitic. In 2000, the former head of Abu Kabir Institute of Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv, Dr. Yehuda Hiss, admitted that the organs were harvested from dead Palestinians without the consent of their families throughout the 1990s. The interview with Israel's Channel 2 network was released to the public after 9 years. Later, Israeli government officials acknowledged prior organ harvesting, but also claimed that the practice ended years ago. Another Israeli doctor, Myra Weiss, also accused Israel of organ harvesting in her book Over Their Dead Bodies. Weiss, who worked with the Forensic Institute between 1996 and 2002, alleged that organs were extracted from Palestinians and used in medical colleges at Israeli universities for research purposes. In 2014, an investigation by Israeli television included testimonies from high-ranking officials revealing that skin was taken from dead Palestinians and African workers to treat Israeli soldiers with burn injuries. The 1949 Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits the mutilation of dead bodies. Each party to the conflict must take all possible measures to prevent the dead from being despoiled. Euromed Monitor has also accused Israel of holding the remains of dozens of Palestinians killed during its military operation in Gaza since October 7th, urging Tel Aviv to abide by international law.
Fact check. Did Hamas behead babies? Let's look at what we know so far about where this claim came from and why some media outlets and the White House have retracted the claim. On Saturday, October 7th, Hamas attacked the kibbutz of Kfar Aza. Members of the media were granted permission on October 10th, 3 days later, by the Israeli army to visit Kfar Aza and witness the aftermath of the Hamas attack. During the visit, a reporter from Israeli news outlet I-24 tweeted saying, "Soldiers told me they believe 40 babies, children, were killed." As the day progressed, the information morphed from at least 40 babies were killed to some were beheaded. On the day, the Israeli army could not confirm beheadings. The very next day, in London, commuters were subjected to this horrifying and unverified headline. On October 11th, many Western media outlets jumped on that claim, quoting the spokesman of Israel's prime minister.
The Israeli prime minister's spokesman just confirmed babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated in Kfar Aza.
But many of those same media outlets were forced to walk back their reporting, issuing updates like this one. Israel cannot confirm the specific claim that babies were beheaded in Hamas attack. Later that day, during a press conference, American President Joe Biden claimed he had seen photographs of beheaded babies, saying,
"I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children."
The White House later retracted the statement and published this correction. US officials and the president have not seen pictures nor confirmed such reports independently, but the damage had been done. Biden's initial claims were already featured on the front pages of many news outlets and continued to be cited in some quarters as justification for revenge attacks and the collective punishment of civilians in Gaza. Once these claims went viral, other journalists who were on the same visit to Kfar Aza on the 10th of October say, "No one spoke to me about beheadings, let alone beheadings of children, let alone beheadings of 40 children." Another Israeli journalist said, "During the tour, we didn't see any evidence of this, and the army spokesperson or commanders also didn't mention any such incidents." Sky News correspondent on the ground also confirms not being able to confirm these claims.
We have not seen the evidence of that. We have asked the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, 3 times to confirm those numbers. They have not yet.
Later, the same journalist that broadcasted the claims of the spokesman of Israel's prime minister posted an apology, saying, "The Israeli government now says today it cannot confirm babies were beheaded. I needed to be more careful with my words, and I am sorry." Hamas has denied claims that its fighters beheaded children, calling them lies. As details continue to emerge from the aftermath of the Kfar Aza attack, the line between facts and misinformation has blurred. Lies and half-truths have been disseminated by officials and mainstream media in what is becoming a propaganda war.
As a global community, we must respond to weaponized sexual violence wherever it happens with absolute condemnation. There can be no justifications and no excuses. Rape as a weapon of war is a crime against humanity.
Hitting out, Israel's UN envoy said UN women ignored all of the proof and were blind to all of the evidence. Keynote speaker Sheryl Sandberg called upon the entire UN to formally condemn Hamas for these rapes.
School's out in Gaza, and for thousands of teenagers here, this is how the holidays are spent. Preparation for the next conflict with Israel, handling firearms and physical training. Their enemy is very close, just a few hundred meters away at the border. There's every chance they're watching, so the tutors at this summer camp like to keep their faces covered.
We don't want war, but if it is forced upon us, then we are ready. We are training the next generation of fighters who want to protect their homeland.
The camp is run by Hamas, the militant group which governs Gaza. Their hardware is on display, over and underground. One of the reasons the last war went on as long as it did was that Israel was trying to destroy the network of attack tunnels that Hamas had built from Gaza into Israeli territory. Well, Hamas very keen to demonstrate here that their tunnelling strategy is still very much a going concern. As part of their training program, cadets rehearse a cross-border raid to kidnap Israeli soldiers. It's a threat which Israel takes seriously. Its army says it's destroyed several tunnels so far this year. And on the Israeli side of the border, among veterans of the last war, there's a sense of inevitability about the next one.
The situation on the other side has not changed. No seaport, no open borders, and international recognition. So they don't have anything to lose.
Israel maintains an economic blockade of Gaza because it fears that Hamas will use imports for military purposes. But a lack of building materials means that people whose homes were flattened in the bombing of the last war are still living under tarpaulin and corrugated iron.
During the summer, it's so hot, we live like we are dead. During the winter, the children cry because of the cold. In our old house, we had water and electricity. We had no problems then.
There is some rebuilding going on, but it doesn't provide enough work to make any impact on an unemployment rate of 45%. Gaza's young people have grown up in isolation and grown used to a lack of opportunity. There's plenty of bravado amongst the guns at the summer camp, but there's also an absence of hope.
During the 2014 Gaza war, Israel accused Mashal of corruption. A few days later, Israeli operatives hacked into the television networks in Gaza and broadcast a fabricated clip of Mashal talking about his extravagant lifestyle. Simultaneously, the Israeli press published stories about widespread corruption within Hamas leadership, alleging that Mashal and Abu Marzouk embezzled as much as $2.5 billion each. Mashal has denied the corruption accusations.
Israel grew Hamas into what they wanted them to become. What they created was a weapon against Palestine in order to take more settlements, continuing the illegal occupation of the land and forcing displacement.
The ruins feel half a world away from Doha, where the Hamas political leader, Khaled Mashal, lives in exile.
How are you?
He picked up on President Obama's anger over the Israeli Prime Minister's lurch to the ultra-nationalist right.
بالتالي الحرب صنعة إسرائيلية بصرف النظر عمن يحكمها لكن نتنياهو.
Even in the eyes of the Americans and Europeans, Netanyahu is the most extreme leader and the one who likes to shed blood the most. That's why we're expecting difficult times with him. We're not looking for any escalation, but we will defend ourselves.
Israel has walled and fenced Gaza, so Hamas opened up another front, underground. Before I travelled to Doha, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner of the Israeli army took me into a section of a captured Hamas tunnel.
You can see the engineering that's gone into this. This is manufactured, it's not by mistake.
Hamas says the tunnels were part of an active defence aimed at military targets. Israel calls them terror tunnels, to back up rocket attacks which Amnesty International says showed a flagrant disregard for civilian lives.
You can see the way it's been made. This is a real business. This isn't just a game.
In Doha, Khaled Mashal didn't try to deny it.
As long as there is occupation, we will not stop arming ourselves and preparing ourselves to defend ourselves and our people and our land. We are engaged in defensive resistance against aggression and occupation.
Is there a sense in which the activities of Muslim Brotherhood allies, like yourselves in Hamas, are being overshadowed by the growth of jihadist groups, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and the like?
We are an active resistance with a just cause battling the occupier. We have a moderate ideology and an open mind. Others practice violence under the name of jihad, which we condemn. And this is not Islam.
There are plenty of people in America, Britain, Israel, other places, who would laugh when they heard you say that Hamas is a moderate organization. That's not how they describe you.
The ones who are laughing at our logic today, they should laugh at Mandela. They should laugh at George Washington and the American Revolution. The people of the world have been liberated from occupiers, and the Palestinian people are doing the same, and so is Hamas.
Hamas in other newer tunnels, and Israel with its modern armed forces will go to war again if there's no political progress. The challenge for the big powers, who are already confronted by all the other Middle East wars, is at the very least to keep the Palestinians and the Israelis quiet. That probably won't happen.
After October 7th, there were many allegations of rape. This was said to have been committed by Hamas. Hamas would deny the allegations.
Hamas has rejected allegations that it committed crimes against women and children. This is the quote, "Some Western media outlets continue to spread Zionist slander and lies about our Palestinian people and their resistance, which falsely and slanderously promoted allegations that members of the Palestinian resistance beheaded children and assaulted women without any evidence to support their lies and claims." Hamas strongly condemns the baseless allegations.
Israel is doing its best to influence the Western world. They accuse Hamas of abuse they've committed themselves. There's a number of cases where Israeli forces have committed rape.
You mentioned sexual violence. I was part of the human rights vetting process for arms going to Israel, and a charity called Defense of Children International Palestine drew our attention at the State Department to the sexual assault, actually the rape of a 13-year-old boy that occurred in an Israeli prison in the Mosque Bia in Jerusalem. We examined these allegations. We believe they were credible. We put them to the government of Israel. And you know what happened the next day? The IDF went into the DCIP offices and removed all their computers and declared them a terrorist entity. I think it is vital that atrocities not happen to anyone, not sexual violations, not any kind of gross violation of human rights. We are looking at a situation where there is so much dehumanification, where people are not seen for the value that they have.
Israeli forces have been known to use sexual violence with no repercussions. Over the years, several of their victims have come forth never to receive justice. Even their own peers are subjected to sexual violence. Israeli forces have been known to use Palestinians as human shields. They even use Palestinian children as well. Israeli forces have committed numerous war crimes like this. Al Jazeera has been on the front lines covering the atrocity.
On January 4th, 2009, Israeli ground troops moved into the village of Abed Rabbo on the outskirts of Jabalia. Radi Abed Rabbo's family home lies right on the edge, facing southern Israel.
The tanks were surrounding our area from all sides. We could hear intense gunfire, soldiers screaming. The house was shaking. A missile landed here. We kept on running from room to room. Some of the resistance were in the houses behind us. We were caught in the crossfire.
3 days later, the Abed Rabbos heard a loudspeaker announcement telling them to evacuate their home on the spot. They were told by the Israeli army to leave their homes and to walk to this area carrying white flags. When they arrived here, they joined many other residents of this village. Elderly men, women, and children were told to stand on this side of the road, whereas teenage boys and young men were separated and told to stand on the opposite side of the road. Radi says he had no idea what would lie ahead as Israeli soldiers took them away.
First they pushed us, shoved us, and insulted us. Then they divided us in small groups and used us as human shields. The Israelis were afraid of going into the houses, so they would send us ahead to tell people to evacuate. They made me dig holes in the wall and enter the houses first to check in case they were booby-trapped. We were put in front, so in case of gunfire, we would be the ones on the receiving end.
Meanwhile, just one street away, Radi's uncle Majdi was going through the most terrifying 24 hours of his life.
The officer said I would not see my family if I didn't do it. I said I didn't want to, but he said I had to follow his orders. He pushed me with his weapon, held me by my neck, and kicked me. He said, "Go."
Majdi says he had to go back and forth between Israeli soldiers and 3 Hamas fighters holed up in this house, now flattened. The battle was raging all around.
When I arrived at the front door, I was surprised to find 3 gunmen from Al-Qassam Brigade. One of them was wearing a suicide vest, and the others were carrying Kalashnikovs. I had to come here 4 times. The last time I went into the house from here because the entrance was destroyed. Each and every time, Israeli soldiers would tell me that they had killed the fighters, and each time I found them more injured but still alive. The last time I came here was at 1:30 in the morning.
Majdi lived in the adjacent building. He says the soldiers made him dig this hole to allow him access to where the fighters were holding their ground. After doing this 4 times, the Israeli soldiers took Majdi to this white building where he was released along with his nephew Radi. Al Jazeera put the accusations made by Radi and Majdi Abed Rabbo to the Israeli army. In its response it said, "The IDF operated in accord with the rules of war and did the utmost to minimize harm to civilians uninvolved in combat. IDF forces were instructed to make no use for any purpose whatsoever of the civilian population during the combat, and certainly not as human shields. After an inquiry with the commanders who fought in the area, there is no evidence that such events occurred." But for Radi and Majdi, the memories of those days are still vivid.
Warning, the following video is graphic. The following footage shows the moments before Israeli forces would bomb a hospital. Article 18 of the Geneva Convention stipulates that a building designated as a civilian hospital cannot be the target of attack. Therefore, this is considered a war crime, yet another crime of war in which Israel will have no repercussions for. When the rich wage war, it's the poor who dies. Jean-Paul Sartre. The following clip is from Middle East Watch.
Is Hamas in control of the West Bank? No, right? You know, okay? Leave Gaza aside. Do you know that it was just announced, as Israel was attacking Gaza, there was an announcement of hundreds of millions of funding by the Israeli government to build the new settlements yesterday?
Yeah.
What is that? How do you describe that in legal and political terms? Have you followed settler terrorism in the last 6 weeks? Have you reported settler terrorism? Have you seen them burning villages? Have you reported the depopulation of entire villages in the West Bank? So what is that? Oh, Hamas doesn't exist there. So you sit here, Christian, and tell me this is a war on Hamas. This is a war on our people that has been lasting for 75 years. Relentless, non-ending. And regrettably, with such an international scene, with such a Western way of coping with us, it's not stopping.
She rarely leaves her home, overwhelmed by dark thoughts. Her husband lost his job 4 years ago. Since then, they have gradually sold all their belongings to survive. Now there's not much left, and the family's in debt.
There's no point in hoping. The situation gets worse by the day. Each time there's a little calm, something bad follows. I have to beg our neighbors for some food. Sometimes I only have a cup of tea or sandwich filled with lettuce to feed my children.
Nahid says she's tried to take her life more than once. She feels guilty for punishing her children, and her suicidal mood is affecting the entire family. Palestinians in Gaza are finding it more and more difficult to live, and children are the ones suffering the most. Tamer was only 4 when he saw his cousin killed by an airstrike during the war in 2014. The images still haunt him.
He was in the school that was bombed. He saw the massacre that happened there, and since then he's not the same. He's never recovered. He's violent. He wants to hit people all the time. He's very scared. He talks about it all the time.
Mental health doctors say each round of violence adds new trauma to the old unresolved ones.
Of course, many people are disturbed by the situation. There are no salaries. They are worried about the economy and the political situation. They wonder how they're going to go ahead. Now there are also parents worried because their children have gone to protest at the fence and they don't know what to do.
Teenagers are the most difficult to control. Yasser left his blind mother home to join the protest along the border fence with Israel. We had met him and his friends several weeks ago in one of the encampments. They complained about growing up under siege. They compared Gaza to a big cage. They threw stones, burned tires, and attempted to cut the fence. Each time, Yasser was hoping it would be the last.
I was telling the soldiers to shoot me here, in the head, because I'm fed up with my life. I can't read or write. I'd like to know how to. I can't find work. The world is closed for me. That's why I go throw stones. If I had a job, I wouldn't. I prefer to be in an Israeli jail. It's better than here.
Yasser lost 2 fingers, was shot in the legs, and saw his friends die next to him. Now he says he was lucky to survive, even if the reality he and others tried to escape is still very much here.
Israeli content creators have been taking part in a new trend, making videos mocking Palestinians. Many clips include children. Creators are seen flicking lights on and off or drinking water after water and electricity supplies were cut off from Gaza. Many of these videos have gone viral across social media, highlighting what activists say is a double standard. There have been several reports of accounts that posted about the suffering in Gaza being flagged or taken down. The account at I1 Palestine, which had more than 6 million followers on Instagram, suddenly went dark. Meadows says it locked the account after detecting a possible hacking attempt. Gaza's 2.3 million residents are currently living under Israeli bombardment and a humanitarian crisis that has worsened due to Israel's total siege that's been imposed on the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th.
The skies over Gaza are filled with projectiles of death, attack helicopters, drones, artillery shells, tank shells, mortars, bombs, missiles. Gaza is a cacophony of explosions and forlorn screams and cries for help beneath collapsed buildings. Fear, after the 7-day truce, is coiling itself again around every heart in the Gazan concentration camp. Over 16,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including over 6,000 children, have been killed since October 7th, with another 42,000 wounded. More than 1.8 million people, over 80% of Gaza's population, have been driven from their homes. Thousands are missing, buried under the rubble. More than 300 families have lost 10 or more members. Nearly 300 Palestinians at the same time have been killed in the West Bank and over 3,000 wounded. Israel will not be deterred. It plans to finish the job, to obliterate what is left in the north of Gaza and decimate what remains in the south, to render Gaza uninhabitable, to see its 2.3 million people driven out in a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing via starvation, terror, slaughter, and infectious diseases. The Biden administration refuses to set conditions that will disrupt the $3.8 billion Israel receives in annual military assistance and the $14.3 billion in supplemental aid. It mutters useless bromides about surgical strikes while Israel spins its roulette wheel of death. By the time Israel is done, the 1948 Nakba, or catastrophe, where thousands of Palestinians were massacred in dozens of villages, and 750,000 were ethnically cleansed by Zionist militias, will look like a quaint relic of a more civilized era.
The Guardian would make a report on a child in Gaza.
When I hear the sounds of ambulances, I rush to the hospital to see if people have been killed. Every day I hear the sounds of rocket fire, ambulances and people screaming. I have seen many dead children with their bodies torn apart. I live with my mom, my dad, my sisters and my grandparents. We're living in a small tent. It's very crowded. I wish we had a normal childhood and that we lived safely again in our homes without fear. I had a vanity table which I used for my hairstyles. Now I use a car mirror. We have to stand in line to get water, but it is salty, which is bad for the kiddies. If you drink too much of it, you'll need an operation, which you cannot get if you don't have enough money.
يلا عنا الغسالة حلوة وكل شيء كويس وإن شاء الله ربنا بعودنا من نكسر على الغسالة ونخبز عفرنا الطيب وناكل ونشرب الحمد لله لأن الله يمنعنا. زدت المستشفى اليوم.
When I go to the shop, I don't find much. They have nothing. I wish it wasn't like this. I wish we lived in better times. But right now life in Gaza is very hard. Many of my friends were killed. Some weren't and they are still here. But most of them have died.
اقلب هيك يا ستة. اي رق. الله الحمد لله رب العالمين.
مين بجهز النار؟
هيك يا ستي صح؟ هيا قاعد
فيها على النار
كل الوضع يا ستي صعب اليوم. يا عالم ممكن نموت ويمكن نعيش إن شاء الله وبإذن الله. شفت الحبايب من دونك دايب.
I wish we could go back to the north, so I could see if our home was bombed or not.
يلا حط اعمل هيك. يلا 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 تخبير تخبير. طخك يا هاشم اعمل هيك. يلا 1 2 3 4 5 لما ننزل على الدار شو بدك تعمل؟
ننزل على الدار؟ ايش بدي اعمل فيه؟
لما نروح على الدار
بدي اغششكم نرجع زي ما زمان نطلع على الفيسبوك نروح على المنتزه شوية نطلع دار اختي شوية
الهواء على 20 على 20 ورقة مقص خبطتك ضمني حجرة ورقة مقص قصتك ثلاثة ورقة مقص.
I wish I could sleep comfortably, like the other kids sleep around the world. I want to live and wish I felt safe.
Israel would cut off water and electricity to Gaza.
Between rounds of Israeli bombardment, people in Khan Yunis struggle to get what may be the last pieces of bread in the bakeries.
I'm waiting to get bread for my family. I've been surprised more than once by how long the queue was. I've been to 4 different bakeries, and each one has a queue outside. I don't know what to do in this situation. I had to sit and wait here until it's my turn.
As you can see, people are waiting, but there's no flour, no water, nor oil. The situation is difficult. We're waiting for an hour or 2 to get a bag of bread. Bakeries don't have flour anymore. We don't know if we will secure bread today or even tomorrow.
The impact of the fuel crisis is affecting people's lives in every respect here.
Our neighbor has a solar panel, so everyone is coming here to charge their phones.
It's the only way for people to be able to call their loved ones and be sure they're still alive.
And that reality is worsening by the day. Israel has told more than 1 million Palestinians to flee the northern part of the Strip. As they move south, Khan Yunis will be overwhelmed with families forced from their homes. The UN is calling for them to have immediate access to food, water, fuel, and other vital supplies that they need to survive.
The behavior of Israeli forces in Gaza has been criticized. After controversial clips appeared online, soldiers were filmed setting fire to scarce water and food supplies. Others were seen rummaging through private homes. This clip shows soldiers riding through the rubble on bicycles belonging to Palestinian children. This soldier appears to be smashing toys after entering a shop. These soldiers sang a song including the words, "We know our slogan, there are no people who are uninvolved." More than 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since October 7. In Israel, the official death toll stands at about 1,200. As 2023 comes to a close, the death toll will continue to rise for Palestinians. Displacement will ensue, and Israel will continue to play the victim in a conflict they created, all to gain control over resources.
في الألفاظ كاملة عائلة كاملة في الألفاظ